we spoke a lot with Mo, you were able to see the pack house and the various things that the young guys and young minds in Africa are doing. We're going to continue our conversation with Mo to know more about the various processes, his business, his journey, and how he is contributing to building a successful Africa. Let's get the conversation going. Does the African youth know this? I'm bringing you to a point whereby you have a lot of exodus of African youth. West, East, South, wherever they find it, they want to just get out of Africa. Does African youth see what you see? Tracing my way back years ago, I got into agriculture out of anger. I was angry. The mere fact that we were importing onions into Ghana, and the onions is importing onions on Netherlands. I mean, you fly onions with hard currency. So you exchange your CD or your naira to go and buy onions. This doesn't make sense. Now, but you have a lot of African youth that feels like there's nothing here for me.
So it's a very good point. So first of all, kudos to the West. I mean, from a Nigerian perspective, kudos to countries like Canada and the UK. They're so good. You know, they can literally just open the tap a little bit, and our youth are rushing. They are the best of our best who will rush there, right? In the hope of a better life.
All the doctors that we've trained them for years, the nurses we've trained them for years, the teachers.
Absolutely. And it's so crazy because the doctors and nurses go, and it's like, yeah, we can replace them, but the teachers also go. Who's going to teach the next set of doctors and nurses? Yeah. So kudos to them, right? They have a problem, they just turn it a little bit and they solve that problem. So that's great. The reality of it is, well, I see it twofold. I do think that there is some potential benefit of having our people go there. Because that's the first part. Because the second part is now when they go there, they realize that look, the grass it looks greener, but it rarely is greener. Yeah, right. But in the UK, you're spending at least $10 to cut your hair. It's such a small
at
thing.
least £10.
Absolutely. Same thing with Uber.
Yeah.
Right. An Uber ride that same distance in Nigeria could cost you $2. You're spending $20 in the UK.
Yeah.
So again, some things are cheaper, more expensive. Things are never as black and white. There's always pros and cons. Is how I see it. So there are cons to the West. It's more stable. There's some form of social security, infrastructure works. All that stuff is there. But there's a downside to it as well, which a lot of our youth don't realize. We're spoiled to a degree here in ways we don't understand. Most people have some form of help in their house. They have security. I mean, in my home, small group of people that help us work. And it doesn't cost us that much money, but it works because for them, there's no other economic opportunity. So this works here, and for us, that works. When we go to the West, right, we lose all of this. And I think people don't understand really what it means to move and live in the West. You're very on your own. You have to handle things yourself. There's no uncles and aunties that if you hit up for a little bit of help.
Your next door neighbor just doesn't.
No, you're hungry one day. You can't go to someone, auntie, uncle, please, and just go and have lunch, and all that disappears. You're really on your own, and I think it's a very lonely life out there. The communal living that was our culture, that sort of was the African way, it doesn't exist in the West. So there's a lot of sadness. I mean, I was reading a thread on Twitter about people crying in the UK.
Yeah.
Like one guy posted how he moved to the UK and he's been crying, and a ton of people on there just told their different crying in the UK stories. So for our youth, so I think the potential upside is that there are things to be gained from the West. There's a way of thinking, there's an exposure, there's all of that. So ultimately, for me, the best way this story pans out is we have a ton of people move there, pick up some of the good things there, get so frustrated there, come back here and bring some of that greatness back into Africa. So that's my own hope with regards to that topic.
In the area of agri, this business actually, what would be your 3 key suggestions or advice going forward in sector? You've played about a decade in this space, and that is education that you're not going to find in the classroom. The lecturer was not going to give you that because it's practical. Now, 3 key things. So 1, to the stakeholder or the policymakers. That's 1. 2, the second category will be the quote unquote, the international partners or the developmental partners. I mean, a lot of times they are bringing in funds and want to do projects. You find that the projects are actually capacity building, production, so development parts as well. And the average youth or the average farmer within this space who wants to get into agriculture, who wants to get into the agribusiness, what would be your advice?
So first thing is to really understand, this concept of value chains. So let's talk about, let's say talk about catfish, for example. Right. When you
I saw a nice catfish being packaged at your
yes, thank you. It's also something that we do. So when you say catfish, the first thing most people think about is primary production, raising fish, but the truth is there's so many different businesses you can have in that single catfish value chain. You can have a feed company that produces feed, and that's all it does. You can have a breeder company, so essentially you produce brood stock, which are the big fish that you use to make the small baby fish, and that can be a business all in its own. You have hatcheries, right? So a hatchery will basically have some brood stock, and you just you make little tiny baby fish that you sell to people that grow out fish. Obviously, there's the growing out business where you buy the baby fish, feed them until they become big fish. There's a trading business, right? So there's literally people that their job is to find demand, find supply, buy, sell, make their money, and that's all. There's a processing business, whereas you buy the ready fish, you smoke dry it, and you sell it. So there's different businesses across that value chain. So the first step is whatever value chain you're trying to go into is to understand it across board. That's number one. And understand which parts of it you want to play in. And that part you want to play in, you really want to try and leverage whatever you have. Like if you're good at marketing and you know a ton of businesses, then maybe you can be a good trader.
We actually forgot about the guy who does the barbecue and the grill.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. And honestly, if you have a good market, that's possibly the most profitable way you can run it. Because you're buying the fish and you're doing 3-4x on top of it, throwing some spice, wrapping it in foil, throwing it on the grill. Absolutely, right? Yeah. So that's the first thing. Understand the whole value chain and really see understand what you can leverage that you have best, so know which parts you want to play in. So look at your interests, know what you can leverage, and use that to go in. Don't just go in on the basic level that you understand. So that's that advice. For the young people also looking to get into it, also just understand your limitations and just try and play in how you can play. Like if you don't have more capital, find a way to go about it. If you have some land, find a way to maximize that, right? So just be smart and then start small. Right. Don't go in big, start small. Agriculture is a savage industry. There's not many industries that $1 million can disappear like that. What? Livestock, crops, they can all die and the money is just gone, right? So that's that. For the development partners, I think, at the risk of offending anyone, I think maybe a bit more sincerity in what's being done, right? I mean, we've seen these programs, there's a $300 million and something, and that's, and it's all spent programs for 4 years. When it's over, things are exactly where they were, right? So maybe a different approach to things, right? I mean, I don't have all the answers there, but I don't know, just a different way to do things, right? And also, that there have been programs that, say they want to support and grow the industry and all sorts, and, they end up giving money to the big guys that don't need the money, right? The big guys that have access to the cheap finance, have all this, and these guys still want to pump money into these entities. There has to be a little bit more risk appetite, and you need to support
leaving the smallholder farmer who needs just about, let's say, 1,000 of that amount that's been
Absolutely, yeah. And then finally, you said the state.
It's not also because, or it's been tendency that the youth or the smallholder farmer cannot manage finances. Is that not because of it, or you're not getting the narratives right?
Well, I mean, again, don't get me wrong. A lot of these programs will target one, and please, again, let me not, let it not be like I am
taking a swipe at it.
Yeah, right. Because some are doing really, really good work, right? I think that 2Scale is doing some really good work. I think the Dutch in total, like I really like their own approach to development in the agricultural space. So some entities are doing really really good work. What I think it just is that there are other motives, right? Sometimes with this financing, yeah, sometimes consultants are paid so much. The program, so much money is spent on actually administering the program, and sometimes
the program itself.
yeah, sometimes you have people that are PowerPoint and just spreadsheets, and they're not in the field. They don't really understand what the issues are, and they're not necessarily dealing with the right entities, right, to try and solve these issues. I think another challenge sometimes, especially when dealing with Africa, is that some development organizations, their mandate is that they must work with governments, and across the globe, government is a highly inefficient machine. And coming to Africa, it's even 10 times exacerbated. So that kind of approach needs to change a little bit.
Right.
Like you want to run an impact program and you're trying to deal with, an African government. Come on, man, like you know how things get here.
Especially when you try to finance an African government during campaign season. It's a political campaign and it's financing into capacity.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a real issue of continuity as well.
Yeah.
The democracy, the West sold us 4 years, so we're running 4 years, and from one government to another, it's very rare that a new minister or a new governor will carry on the policies of the previous guys. Yeah, so there are all these small shortcomings that I think can be innovated around. Let me say it that way. And then finally, you said stakeholders. So by stakeholders, who exactly do you mean? Are we talking?
So stakeholders. So I started with the government policymakers.
Policymakers, okay.
Policymakers.
Okay.
And then the government.
For the policymakers.
Okay, let me give you an example. Africa has a lot. Let me just not use Africa as general. West Africa.
Mm.
So, we do have the largest population in Africa.
Mm.
West Africa, the land mass and everything. But majority of the schools have removed practical agriculture from their syllabus. That's the lowest hanging fruit that but you remove practical agriculture from it, and then you are teaching something else. That's policy. You and I cannot just go into the classroom and say, let's teach everybody agriculture. And it's policy makers. That's one. Another thing has to do with fertilizer, or even when we are talking about GMOs and all these things. It is policy makers' duty to make sure that those things work. Why would you on earth want to even put taxes on importation of agricultural equipment, implements, inputs, agrochemicals? So when I mean policymakers, that is the kind of direction, because the policies are what drives.
Yeah.
As you're saying, we cannot. Currently, there's a new craze about cannabis, industrial hemp, marijuana. When you go into things like this, and you sit there and you look at some African countries with all those potentials, and they sit back and say, they're looking at the guy who called to smoke that evil, as against the industrial benefit or the economic gains. What do you think about citizens when it comes to?
Firstly, right, for the policymakers, again, I would say sincerity and responsibility. So again, sincerity, commitment to work and purpose, real love for your country, right? Because if you really love your country, you can see things, take a bigger view to things. I think it starts to become clear, like, what needs to be done. I think that, unfortunately, Africa has personal interest is such a big problem for us here. And don't get me wrong, right? In the West and the developed world, there's also personal interest, but in Africa, it's just a little bit different, where personal interest is significantly more than the love to actually getting
than the community one or the country, the nation's one.
Yeah, so I feel that's where the first problem comes, right? So if there was more of that would help better. And obviously, in a more practical way, I would say just more accountability. I don't think we have much accountability in Africa, right? I mean, if an appointed government worker or public office holder does not do his job in Nigeria, 9.9 out of 10 times nothing happens. There's no standards, there's no KPIs, so I think that accountability sort of is the way that you checkmate that first. And then the second thing now is responsibility. And I say this because you have heads of these organizations and there's all this kind of nonsense that's happening across board, and the heads act like it's not my responsibility to ensure this thing works well, right? For example, I mean, so this is not even agriculture related, but at our airports in Nigeria, we have these scanners, right? That scan bags.
Yes.
But literally, after the bag scans, there's a desk there, and there's literally a customs person and an NDLE. NDLE is our drug agency.
Yes.
The two of them there, and you just scan your bag through a scanner, and they're going to ask you to put your bag there and open it up, right? Now, this has become a common practice, but there was a scanner, like you could see everything. Why are you making me do this? And at the end of the day, it's our way, our culture, anything for the boys, you got a little bit selling. But then, why I say responsibility is that there is a head of the NDLEA, and there is a head of customs. And if you really meant to, you would be aware of this, and you do something about it. It's not hard now. Literally, just send 10 people, right, as ghost customers to go and check and test. And the fear of that alone would stop a lot of this hanky-panky on the other side. But none of that happens, because again, when people are appointed to agencies, they become big men. And then when they're big men, they don't have time for this nonsense. It's too small, it's beneath them. Yeah. But it's your responsibility, right? So for me, I think those two things would go along with. They're very practical ways for them to go a long way to make things easier for people in the industry here.
What's your take on the continental free trade?
My first take on it is logistics.
Right.
You realize how difficult it is to move goods, say, from Nigeria to Ghana. It's absolutely insane. Trucks get stopped.
Without this, how do we
do, right?
Wow.
So
what do you think would be the best solution?
So, and again, don't get me wrong, in all fairness, right, we do have security issues here, right? So you can't just let things move like that, right? But I think that, when you really go back and look at Africa, right, and the way Africa was sort of cut up and divided and sort of shared, like I like to call it, in Nigeria, people say national cake when we talk about government and your entitlement. Yeah, I call it, it's a continental cake, right, and was shared by the world. And the mentality that Francophone West Africa and Anglophone West Africa, it's like we're different people. We're brothers, man. It's the same blood. It's the same skin. But then that cuts off division. And when you think about Africa as a whole, so you have French-speaking Africa, you have English-speaking Africa, you have Portuguese-speaking Africa, you have the Arab influence in Northern Africa. So all this division makes it really difficult for us to come together. And until there's that, real deep understanding, right? It's almost, we have to, and it's very difficult because it's been decades of division and reinforcement. How do you make me and, my Togolese brother feel like we're one? Or how do you make my Ghanaian brother and my Senegalese brother feel as one? Or even when you think of something like Gambia, literally, like Senegal is here and Gambia is just carved out of Senegal in the middle, right? How literally
I feel more safer jumping over the two countries. That is Togo and Benin to Nigeria than
you get me, right?
So nobody seems to even understand you.
And then again, when you go back to the French and the English, they have their thing, right? That thing is translated to Africa. Yeah, why? That's not our problem. But we've inherited all these things, and we've not reclaimed our own identity back. And it's a very sort of cultural, and there's a lot of philosophical angles to it. But we have to tackle some of these things before we can get to the practical. And it's really sad that the AU is really at the state it is now. Again, every African state is supposed to contribute towards the AU, right? So it's supposed to give money to be able to do things. But it's been really difficult. The EU, they kind of figured it out. Of course, they have their own issues, but they've made a lot more progress than the EU has. I know that I believe that the EU struggles to get his contributions from most African nations, right? So all these things are issues that will hamper. I think it's a great initiative. I think the idea behind it is great. I do think there's some trade behind it will work. But we really have to figure out the logistics. If we cannot move goods cost effectively, easily, and timely across the continent, then that's a stumbling block that is going to hamper the growth of the free trade agreement. Yeah.
Right. Give me 5 key products in your view that you think you can deal in commodities, so this is really big for you, that you think Africa has a grip on and can make it their own. I mean,
Yeah. I get your question. First things first, I'm not a believer in, I think Nigeria as a country has this philosophy that, we've got to develop everything. Absolutely not. As much as China is such a big producer, it's also one of the biggest importers out there. So again, I get it, like we are importing too much, but really are not going to produce everything. In terms of focus areas, so again, I don't think I can take a continent-wide view, but a Nigeria view. Rice is quite well developed. We're happy with the progress we made with rice. I think oil palm.
right.
And it's a little tricky because, I think oil palm, I think Singapore has really sort of developed their oil palm industry.
Malaysia has just
Exactly, right? And I think that Nigeria, maybe we could catch up there. I mean, ultimately, don't get me wrong. I think part of our challenge is we have, because of the fertility and the climate
we
in
are too
Nigeria.
blessed.
Yes, so we just really need to pick and focus. I mean, Kaduna State in Nigeria produces one of the most ginger anywhere in the world. I know that our African mangoes, in terms of, or Nigerian mangoes, in terms of their sweetness, are some of the sweetest mangoes anywhere across the world. Cassava, right? They're just one of the biggest producers of cassava. So I think for Nigeria, I think cassava definitely should be a strong focus commodity for us. But yeah, I think each country just kind of needs to figure out, look, let's focus on these few guys, let's build them up. If they can be cash cows for us, and then we can decide to develop whatever other commodities we think are worthwhile for us on the global stage.
When you did mention cassava, we as the current Ukraine-Russia war is costing the cost of our bread. Why should UK and Russia fight and bread in Babrada be affected? And it's also because recently we got to know that cassava flour actually can be every baking mix. So it's like we have all these things and we've not been able to hammer down, we've not been able to highlight and then make better progress on it. Your closing remarks for any young farmer who is watching, anybody who gets sincere. You're young guy, you go into this farming more than 10 years ago. The short words, piece of advice or suggestion. So that we see one of the key things we are missing in this part of our part of the world is mentorship.
I agree.
Resource mentorship as well as mentorship.
I agree. Yeah. Yes, so I think, just coming right off the back of what you said, find someone who's done it and learn as much as you can from them. And in fact, if you can get an apprenticeship in a company, do that first. It'll save you years of pain. It'll save you a lot of money, save you a lot of time, right? I know how much I've done that I don't want to say amounted to nothing, but I know how expensive my own learning curve has been, which is again why, I'm so big on teaching, right? I really like to teach wherever I can impact what I know, to help someone else save time or save money. I'd love to do that. And we kind of really need to do that if this thing is to grow and to work. So for any young person, find a company, go intern there, right? Do whatever you have to do. Don't get paid, offer them free labor, and go and get it, right? That knowledge will save you years and years of pain. Don't go into agriculture lightly. Do not underestimate the power of knowledge in agriculture. Again, like I said earlier, it's a very savage and punishing, unforgiving industry. It'll eat up your money like nothing you've ever seen. So you really want to get as much knowledge and mentorship as possible to save you from making very silly mistakes that will cost you so much money. So that largely would be my advice.
My nickname is actually Swag Farmer.
Swag Farmer, I like that.
Right? Basic is to make farming sexy, make farming attractive for the young African to get into. And you've actually inspired me, and I hope a lot of guys will be inspired to get into this sector. And not only going the usual way of doing not the primary production and the value addition. Yeah, I think this has been very, very, very insightful one. And this is where I'm going to really close the curtains on for today's episode. My name is Emmanuel Lanzan Profi. I brought you this Agrofocus Africa. Thank you.